Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, that great city that we saw right in that point between the West Bank and Israel, that city that has been so important to people down the centuries. He was on that way to Jerusalem where he would confront injustice, hypocrisy, clearing out the temple of the sellers and money changers, those exploiting the pilgrims. He would weep over the city. And Jesus, as he comes to that great city, sees it in the distance, knows that rejection lies ahead of him. But he also knows that this is part of God's plan to seek the lost, to love and save the world. Jesus is on his way. He's got important business to do. In fact, the business of global salvation. What more important business could that be? And on his way, the little town of Jericho has to be passed through. And as he passes, this little man up in the tree catches his attention. He's got such important business to do, but this little man stuck up a tree catches his eye. Got so much on his shoulders, but he's got time for this little man. In fact, he calls him by name. How did he know the name of Zacchaeus? Perhaps Zacchaeus was notorious and he'd seen him before. And Jesus invites himself to Zacchaeus' house. No one is beyond Jesus' attention. For all the important things on his shoulders, the weighty matters in his mind, he's not distracted from you and me and whoever needs him in their life. Of course, the crowd grumble. They mutter. This man is a sinner, isn't worth any attention, should be dismissed, should be driven out of the town. But Jesus doesn't care, carries on going to the house of Zacchaeus. This little man, this wicked, unjust, dishonest tax collector, is still important to Jesus. And in that invitation that Jesus makes for himself, Zacchaeus' life is transformed for good. It's transformed in that very moment that Zacchaeus decides to come down from the tree to invite Jesus into his home. It's transformed the very moment that Jesus speaks to him. That name, Zacchaeus, greets him by name, calls him down by name. It's transformed in that very moment that he stands up to the muttering that surrounds him and says, I am going to change my life. I am going to repay anyone I've cheated. I am going to give half of my possessions to the poor. I'm going to live a new, generous life. It's transformed the moment that Jesus says to him and to the crowd, this is a son of Abraham, part of God's family, one who had been lost, but now has been welcomed back, has been found, and we should join the celebration. Today we've been celebrating the transformations that are being made in communities through the work of Link to Hope in Eastern Europe and Commitment for Life across the world, and especially in Israel and the occupied territories of Palestine. We know there's huge suffering in those lands, huge poverty, disease, and added to all that, violence and conflict, and seemingly an endless spiral of conflict and warfare. But we are committed as Christians to see a world transformed, just as that one life of Zacchaeus was transformed long ago. We want that for individuals, and we want it for neighborhoods and communities and villages and towns and cities. We want it for nations. We want it for the whole global community. That transformation that Isaiah longed for in his own society. Today, the story of Zacchaeus reminds us that God is interested in the world, the universe, creation itself, but that does not take away God's interest and concern for every human life. Every human being is valuable, is important to God. And we so easily, as a human race, forget that. We make people just statistics. News reports, government policy, warfare casualties. 151 young people crushed in Korea last night. Thousands of young Russian soldiers killed in Ukraine through the madness of their leaders. Thousands of Ukrainian soldiers and citizens killed in that land too. 6 more Palestinians killed this last week, adding to the 184 killed over this last year. More than 100 protesters killed in Iran following the death of Mahsa Amini in September. And so many lives weighed down by fear or poverty. We want to hear the stories of people like Bobby transform. We want to hear the stories of Israelis and Palestinians finding a new way of peace. What are we going to opt to do? Zacchaeus made huge commitments that day to Jesus. What are our commitments to be? As a church, we are challenged to play our part within Commitment for Life, and Trinity needs to think about that. How will we do that? Will that be through individual giving? There are envelopes at the side on the table there. You might want to do that, give a donation to Commitment for Life. Or we might want to do a fundraising event. You could support Cause End. They have a charity morning on Saturday the 26th of November. Perhaps Trinity could even have a table at that sale. Half of that will be in aid of Commitment for Life. But what are we going to do? Thank you for what you've done this morning. But we can do more in our different ways, through praying, through awareness, through giving. Let's be committed to the life of every human being. Amen.